Just to review from last week's class, and sorry the recording didn't come out yet, we've been a little bit behind schedule on some things because we've been trying to get the other things going. I'm thinking, that things will be a little more smooth now, that we're all sort of very clear as to where we need to be and the way we need to be and what we need to do. And some of the questions are getting answered, and the unknowns are becoming known, at least in terms of what to do this day. So I think that will hopefully allow us to get caught up in some of these other areas. So regarding the last class, we were... sorry, just a sec. Prasanna, could you zoom in? I'm sorry, I thought I'd said that. If you could zoom in a little more closely. So, regarding the last class, we really came to understand this title, Going Deeper on the Spiritual Path, by understanding what is the spiritual path. And really the spiritual path is the goal of which it is to find God. We find God through union with God, which is described as samadhi. I mean, that's one way to understand both of those phrases, samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, and finding God. Okay, and then the question is, if that, then how? And what we talked about was that we are overcoming the ego. We need to overcome the ego. Again, because the energy to achieve samadhi, the energy has to rise in the spine, but the spine has a lot of desires, which are called vrittis. They're trapped energy. Remember the frozen blocks of water in the river that impede the flow of water, but they're made out of the same thing as the water itself. They're made out of water. And so that yes, we have to melt these blocks of ice or burn up these seeds of karma, but we also have to begin by stopping the creation of new seeds of karma. And that in itself is enough to achieve nirvikalpa samadhi. I say enough, it's actually quite a lot. But that's really what all of our meditative efforts are geared towards. That's why Kriya, for example, is such a powerful technique, because it works directly on these seeds of karma in the spine. Every practice of yoga works on these seeds of karma, but many of them do it indirectly. The purpose of asana, for example, is to help us to release trapped energy, not in the spine, but in the body, in the form of physical tension. And so also, there can be pressure on certain glands and organs. That's the physical benefits, and there are other benefits as well. But the general energetic benefit is that we release trapped energy, trapped in the form of tension. Physical tension, even mental tension, you could say. Chanting opens the heart, allowing more energy to flow up the spine, because the heart is sort of you could say, almost the gateway of the spine. The mudras, for example, are different from asanas because they involve, in the mudra, in the sense of a pull, where we're pulling, increasing tension, not just relaxing into a particular position. They're also energizing, aimed at increasing the energy flow in a particular part of the body, and hoping therefore to increase the flow in the spine, but again, indirectly, and so on. So all of these techniques have that same purpose. All the techniques of yoga have the purpose of raising the energy in the spine, but again, as I said, many of them indirectly. And it doesn't mean that they're lesser or less useful. After all, they're best done in combination with meditation and in combination with Kriya. You could say the entire purpose of Hatha Yoga, from the point of view of its sort of mother science, which is Raja Yoga, is to help us to meditate, which is the principal activity or action of the Raja Yogi. And so the Hatha Yoga asanas are effective to the Raja Yogi in as much as they help us to meditate better. They make the body strong, they make the spine straight, they help us to relax. I've always enjoyed that after an asana session in a class, then we say, okay, it's time to meditate, let's sit up straight, and everybody's already sitting up straight. They're, if they've had savasana and survived savasana, shall we say, having stayed awake, that they then are very straight, they're very relaxed, they're very just ready to meditate, they're inward. And so it's nice to see that. Hatha Yoga has value also to other people who aren't meditating, and it's wonderful too. It's a very universal science in a sort of paradoxical sense. It's universal in the sense of reaching out to so many different people because it's central. It's almost that because it's at our core, from that core of our being, in this case for Hatha Yoga, we can start with the body and the flow of energy. It then reaches out to so many different approaches. Somebody wanting better physical health, less tension, more flexibility in their body, more energy overall. So, when we then look at Kriya Yoga directly helps us. It directly works with the root cause of the problem, which is to say it burns these seeds of karma. Master said through Kriya Yoga you can burn out your bad karma. And so it's wonderful to have this technique if you do, and if you don't, then you might want to work towards getting it. And then, of course, practicing it. That's the whole point. We get excited about Kriya Yoga because so much is written about it in the autobiography, and it says there that 30 seconds of Kriya can free you from the same amount of karma, or to put it another way, literally, to give you the same spiritual growth that you would achieve normally in 1 year of right living. And so that's certainly what sold me on it. 30 seconds of Kriya gives me the same as 1 year of right living, not 1 year of living, but right living. Okay, let's get it. And so but then once we get it, then we have to use it. And why is it so wonderful to burn out so much karma, a year of karma, or whatever you want to put, or a year of spiritual growth? It's subtly, we can't say a year of karma is burned out, that's not actually accurate, hopefully much more than a year. But still, 1 year of spiritual growth in exchange for 30 seconds. That it helps us to find God more quickly. It leads us to samadhi. It helps us to feel more joy. That is the special, you could say, experience or fruit of Kriya, is that we have, Prasanna, somebody's camera is on, is that we have the experience of joy. And Hong Sa brings God as peace, Om brings God as sound, energization exercises bring God as energy, and Kriya brings God as joy. So, again, clear out the spine, that's what Kriya and meditation is for. But what about the rest of our time? Even now, being at home and having perhaps more time than you're used to, and certainly more time out from the watchful gaze of the boss. We can only meditate so much effectively. And so what do we do with the rest of our time that addresses itself to the same goal? And you could say, but isn't it indirect? I mean, following what I was just saying, all these other things, chanting and positive thinking and affirmations, is it all indirect? Of course it is. Yes, but again, it is something we can do effectively with the rest of our time. We can be cooking and also doing japa. We can be cleaning and singing a chant. We can be talking with someone and giving them our attention, but also trying to feel that Master is sitting right beside us, also listening, or inside of us listening, or even inside the other person speaking to us. And that we can be addressing ourselves. This is something Swamiji said often, that he would, when he was speaking, for example, to a group, he would see Master as residing in each one of them. Meaning, not that he was teaching his guru, but that he could see that full expression of that soul, which is in fact how he put it later in life, the God within them. in the beginning he viewed it as Master, and I think it was partly because it was easy for him to visualize God as he experienced God through Master, as a self-realized avatar, a self-realized soul and an avatar, beyond that even. And so, seeing Master there, it was easy to see the divinity of that person. I remember when I said to Swamiji, I remember you wrote that you were speaking to Master in people, and he kind of said, yes, now I see it as speaking to God in that person, or that person's higher self. And so I said, oh, okay. So I felt there was a little correction there that he was saying, because I might not have been saying it with the right consciousness or the right understanding. In any case, it's very easy to understand addressing the higher soul in another person. And if you can do that by seeing Master in that person, then fine. But understand what it is and who it is you're talking to, whom it is you're talking to. So this is really what we're talking about then in this class, is what to do outside of meditation. And as we said, that's meditation. Meditate to overcome the ego and do these other things to overcome the ego. We talked about 9 different suggestions that Swamiji made. I mentioned those at the end of class. I'll go through, 7 suggestions. I'll mention 7 more today. And also, I did put a few in the WhatsApp group for this class. And we will make an effort to add everybody to that WhatsApp group if you've joined us a little later. But to mention, if you're not in that WhatsApp group, please write to Ashwini to mention that you're not in that group, so that she can add you to the group. And so we also watched a video of Swamiji in a satsang with people, devotees in Gurgaon, right after he had created the Nayaswami order and reading from the Nayaswami order book, which again is the Renunciate order for the New Age, is the title of the book. And he was speaking of the marks of a true renunciate. As I said before, I held back this word renunciation as long as possible, because too often it brings up ideas or images of the past way of renouncing. Again, in the past, renunciation had to be very outward in its expression. It had to be also defined in terms of, I don't do these things. And as a result, speaking, there are so many things that resulted from that, but speaking right now just to us as devotees, what that can feel like is that the real people on the spiritual path are those who are renunciates or are free to renounce. This is or they wear a certain kind of color. This is a particular this particular misunderstanding is strong in India, perhaps more than anywhere else in the world. And because there's been such a history of renunciation here, which of course on one level is good if it's useful. Above all, if it's useful to the renunciate himself or herself. Because too often renunciation just leads to pride. Spiritual pride or pride of position, it's all just false. Pride is the opposite of overcoming the ego. It is inflating the ego. And so it's not even effective then. But also there can be, at least speaking for myself, this feeling of coming onto the path and seeing, some people can become renunciates, I can't, because, why? Either I don't feel to embrace formal outward renunciation, or, as was in the past, I'm married, so I can't. I have children, so I can't. I have to work and support my family, so I can't. And yet I also love God, and doesn't that count for anything? This is a very common conflict. And it's a useless one. It's an imaginary one now in Dwapara Yuga. And why should it be a conflict? Well, let's start with the first premise. One could say, I'm happy the way I am. If those people want to renounce, good for them. We're both finding God. That's in fact the truth. So why not feel that? Well, putting aside whether some renunciates act proudly, I remember I met a Swami once, and I was very open to him because he had in a certain way showed his support for us and So I thought, and when I met him and I was very warm towards him, he was very sort of, yes, I accept your devotion and respect to me as is natural to befitting my station. And he didn't say that, but everything about him exuded that. And I don't want to go into all of it, and who knows the details of it. But I thought, well, I'm glad that wasn't my first reaction. And the fact that I even noticed it, the fact that it bothered me at all, which it did a little bit, shows there was still something in me that needed purification. Never mind him. That's his business. That's between him and God, and who knows. And maybe that was his last particular thing, keeping him back from the infinite, compared to all the things that all the rest of us are saddled with. It's not my place to judge. However, that tendency towards pride, Swamiji observed, is very common. And again, unfortunate, because it's counterproductive to the person himself. Now, but why would we sometimes feel, oh, if only I could be a renunciate, oh, I think it's partly because we've been renunciates before. And so there's partly an attraction to that. It's not just, oh, I don't feel worthy, or I don't feel, up to the mark. It's that I would like that. To find God. Someone told me once, I'd like to be a renunciate. I'd like to become a monk. I said, why? He said, well, then my food and lodging would be taken care of, and I could have more time to read. And I said, well, that's, I think there's a little bit more to becoming a brahmachari than that. And then someone else said, I want to become a monk. And I said, why? He said, because I don't want to get married. I said, yeah, that's not actually the only choices there are in life. You could be a monk, you could be married, or you could be single. To be a monk means there has to be a very positive goal in mind, a monk or a nun. I want to find God. To be a devotee, you have to want to find God. You can be married, you can have children, all this, and want to find God. Again, that is the most important thing, what's in your heart and how you behave. And so, this is why Swamiji expanded the Swami order into the Nayaswami order to include people who were married, to include people who had children and so on, because really it's what's in the heart that matters and the way we behave that matters. I'll talk more about that probably in a later class. What I'm trying to do is to break down barriers, and especially to this word renunciation. As I said in the last class, if you do feel some hesitation around the word renunciation, or this thought of, am I going to be a renunciate, or I can't be a renunciate, it's already too late. Because being strong on the spiritual path means you already are. And so, because you're choosing God. In fact, it's nice to have another word besides renunciate, because it has a negative sense in its literal translation of saying no to the world. And that's fine. But, if you say no to the world, then, what do you say yes to? And so, really, it would be, nice to state it in a positive way. If we could maybe call it a God venum, that would be, instead of the opposite of renunciation, I want God. That would be a positive way to put it. So maybe God venumas and venumis, or never mind. But the idea then is for us to say, whatever I call myself, whatever I wear or don't wear, whatever my situation in life, which again God has optimized for you to get free as quickly as possible, then what do I do? What should be my attitudes? And really that's what this whole book is about. You could really see it, this Nayaswami order book in this class, but the book of course goes into every aspect of it, as a manual for living for every devotee. And so I'd like to, in a moment, we'll go to Swamiji's video continuing on with the marks of a true renunciate. But I wanted to ask you first if anybody had any questions, because I had said some of these things at the end of the last class and then cut everything off before you had a chance to ask any questions. And so if you have a question about anything that I've just said or something related to this topic, if you could raise your hand, click the little hand raising thing. If you don't see that or you can't, you can also type in, I would like to ask something, and then Prasanna can unmute you, and if you can turn on your camera, then we can see you and hopefully hear you. And if it doesn't work, then we'll just move on to the next person, and then you can maybe do a test a little bit later after the class with Prasanna or Ashwini, just to get it worked out, because we're still working out, as I said, some of the kinks. Okay, so as I joked once before, our lines are open and our operators are standing by. Do we have a caller? Do we have a question? Or you could give a comment even. But I would like to hear from somebody. And if you don't, we'll just pick a random person and turn on your camera for you. I'm only partly joking. That happened today. We had a meeting with Jyotishji and Deviji and the other center leaders, and they were talking, and I quickly realized that, my camera was off, my audio was off, and so they were talking this was before the meeting started, with a few other people, and they decided, you know what, let's have everybody be able to have their cameras on, and suddenly my camera turned on, and there I was. Luckily it was fine, but I was in the middle of doing something, and I just got caught, and so I quickly yes, I present and accounted for. So I won't put you through that, but let's have a question from somebody. Okay, I see Zen. Yes, I see your hand, I see your face, but can we hear you? Are there speakers on? Are our speakers on though? I don't see the light. We'll just double check one thing here for us. Okay. You want to try again?
Yeah, I was saying that there's no question, but actually you did clear our doubt on being, that we do not have to take be a spiritual person. You don't have to be. It's okay if you're married. It's okay if you're anything, but still take part. And that was a very nice message. And we're very excited about the class. We love them because we can be anywhere and still listen to the class.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Zan. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome. Nice to hear from you. Nice to see you. It's
Thank you so much.
It's really wonderful to have this technology that allows us to connect and keep our community strong this way. Yes, I'll talk more about the different paths of renunciation in the Nayaswami order. Again, this class, its goal is not necessarily to go into the Nayaswami order as a topic. We will, of course, touch upon it, especially in the last class, and I'm very glad for what you said, and again that for the clarity around all of this. But again, we really want to focus on what we do. That's what matters. What our actions are, what's in our heart, what our words are, and so what our thoughts are. And we know all this. This is, of course, the basis of the spiritual path, but in terms of, again, the non-meditative part of our day. But still, it's nice to know, even as you said, that there are ways in which we can proceed outwardly as well. It's nice to have a vow or a path or a sense of, even a sense of identity. Not that I'm a part of this group, but I know what I stand for. For example, when people take discipleship, often they can feel a connection with Master or an openness to their experience at Ananda in any of our centers, or even if it was just online or through remote classes. That's how I came to the path. It was all just through remote classes. I wasn't living near a center, and so I read the same handbook of discipleship that those of you who are disciples all read, and that was it. But in that book, though I had an inclination in this direction, I did not have a clear understanding. I didn't know the scope of all of these things. I didn't know what it was like to live with Master. I didn't know what the right behavior was that he encouraged in people, again, for their own benefit. So it's very nice to have these lines clarified and for us to say, yes, I'm a part of this. So anyway, thank you for that. Another question or comment from somebody? You see, Zen got to make a comment and she survived, so chances are you'll survive too. I will sometimes say to students, do you want to have a staring contest? But it's no fair, you have me at a disadvantage here. So, one more comment or question, please. Very good. Okay. Well, I can't force you, and so going once, going twice. Muna? Okay, well, let us then go through we'll go to the video of Swamiji. Darshan typed something. I forgot to mention that yes, of course, you can type a question too, or a comment.
But it seems like it's got cut off. Is it not?
Darshan, do you want to type it again? It looks like we didn't get the whole thing. I just want to read to you from what Swamiji had done before this part of the video.
Okay. So he's saying, is it not just good enough to do our Kriyas? Why do we need an external identity?
Is it not good enough just to do our Kriyas? Why do we need an external identity? Yes, it is good enough to do your Kriyas. You don't need an external identity. But I think what I would say is, in what I just said, it's not wholly accurate. We don't need an external identity. That's certainly true. And we don't want to feel, especially, that any kind of external identity, just from the fact of having it, gives us something. You know, Sri Yukteswar calls this pride of pedigree, that because I am a part of this family or this religion, in our case, this spiritual path even, or anything, that gives me that makes me more than I am, without a corresponding internal identity. For example, yes, we can identify as being a child of God, but it's God Himself that gives us the Guru, for example. And then we can identify ourselves as a child of Master. We may not ever tell anyone externally. No one may know that we're practicing Kriya, that we are disciples or anything. And yet it is through our discipleship, through our sense of being Master's child and drawing Him closer and opening to Him to allow Him to draw us closer to God, that we then can get there to God more quickly. So whatever we do externally or not, that's one question, and that's really more a matter of taste and of karma. What matters is how we identify internally, most of all. And that is everything. Now, in terms of being a part of something, yes, it can give us strength. For example, it's always a joy when you as a disciple of Master find another disciple and can share in that. But to walk around waving a flag with Master's name or face on it, you just have to see if that really works for you. Again, not you, Darshan, but anybody. And again, but then the other part of the question is doing Kriya enough? Well, I'd say probably for most of us, no, it's not enough. Remember even Master's phrase, that, which of course I know you know, that meaning I know you know it's not enough, but just saying it generally to everybody, that Kriya plus devotion is spiritual mathematics. It cannot fail to produce God realization. We have to have devotion. And what does that mean? Well, it means a whole lot of things. Love for God, yes. Practicing, expressing that, yes. But think about it. If you really love someone, think of especially like, if you had a father or a mother or a grandfather or a teacher or somebody who you held in respect, who you had great love for, especially if they had helped you, how you would want to not only express that love but you'd also want to be in a good state of mind around them, or you'd want to kind of compose yourself properly, not formally, not stiffly, but just in a way that would be either helpful to them or give energy to them. You'd want to sit up straight in the presence of your teacher to feel that I'm a good student and all that, if it was a sincere feeling, not just a show. And so in that way, even devotion, you could say, to God inspires us to want to behave more properly, which is to say, more godly, more in the direction of God. I remember once, let me put it differently, that we could tell when Swamiji was not pleased with something that we had said. In some ways it was very easy to tell because he voiced his displeasure, and so it was pretty unambiguous. At other times, though, which was much more common, he would say, "And what do you think?" And we'd say, "Well, sir, I think this and this and this." And if we might even say the right thing, but if we said it with the wrong energy, either too emotionally upset or too excited and off-center, he would very often just look away. I mean, look at somebody else. He wouldn't, just completely look away, but he would just, as if, the best reply I can think of to what you said, or the most tactful reply I can think of, is to say nothing at all. And so very often when we ended up seeing Swamiji's cheek, we knew, uh-oh, because he would never act that way normally. If you said something right, he would encourage you. And sometimes I think he was testing us. It wasn't just that he was saying, did you get my message? He was never acting in an egoic way. He was trying always to help us. I had a friend who was or is a bit psychic, and so she was able to operate more on that level. And she said one of the early times she met Swamiji, he was talking to someone, and he said to the person, "I'm very disappointed," basically in that person and what they had or hadn't done. And my friend said she could feel from him that he wasn't disappointed at all, but he was trying to say something that would make an impression on that person to motivate them to change. But in his heart, he had great love for that person and no expectation that they should have been up to the mark, but was trying to see what would work. And she thought, she said, "I want to be like that." And so, like Swamiji. So anyway, very interesting. So yes, just to finish this point, what matters is inside, not outside, internal, not external. And the external is beneficial if it feeds the internal, certainly, but it's not necessary in itself, and it's useless without the internal attitudes and behaviors. But also, doing Kriya, unless we're that close to God anyway, is just not enough for us. And so we do want to engage in other practices as well. Not of other paths, but other things that Master taught. Okay, so going now to the video of Swamiji, picking up where we left off in this satsang, I just want to remind you of what he had said. There are 14 points he lists as the marks of a true renunciate. And he mentioned the first two, just to reread them. What then are the marks of those whom I'd consider worthy of being accepted as true renunciates? They would be those who have achieved noteworthy progress toward the attainment of the following virtues. 1. They have no or very few attachments or desires. And as a reminder, remember those attachments and desires are trap energy that blocks its upward flow to God. And so I say this because so often people, they have no or very few attachments or desires. Oh well, I struck out on step 1, and because I have all kinds of attachments and desires. You know, it's better not to think that way. 2, they are without anger. This was an interesting one for me because when I read the first one myself the first time, they have no or very few attachments or desires. I thought, well, do I have attachments and desires? I don't know. I think I had sort of hypnotized myself into at least not saying I don't have any, but saying I don't know if I have any. Okay, well, let's see. And something in me was feeling uneasy already, like, wait a minute, this can't be right. 2, they are without anger. Okay, I can't say that is true. All right, anger for me. Anger appears in the heart when one's desires are thwarted. And that was the whole thing. If we can get angry, it means we have desires. Because we're only angry if we don't get what we want, which is to say what we desire. Or we get what we desired not to get. You see? So it's a very easy way to help you to know your desires, is to see what are those things that make us upset. I don't want to say make you upset, we're all in it together. What are those things that upset us? That's an excellent way to be a detective, to figure out what desire we have in both directions. In other words, suppose I don't know what desires I have, or I do, but they may not be the important desires that we need to overcome. We can sometimes focus on something that's perfectly innocent, or at least harmless, and instead miss this big thing that we really ought to be working on. And so to diagnose ourselves, we should look at what are those things that make us angry, and that's a hint as what desire we had that was then blocked. Ask ourselves, okay, I'm upset. Why? Because I didn't get what I want. That is the only cause of anger. So what did I want? Or what didn't I want that happened? And then you can start to work with the root cause of the problem, the seed. Remember, these vritti means seed, these seeds of karma. That gets you to the seed. And as Master said, destroy suffering at its roots, thereby there will be no recurrence. And so in the same way, we want to find those seeds, or find the roots of the plant and uproot it. Get those weeds out. And so look, when angry, what desire didn't I get fulfilled, or did I get denied? So, on the other hand, because I said it works both ways, it's also a very effective way of overcoming anger. Because if we see, I'm angry about this because I wanted it this way, and even that itself gives us a reason for our anger, because the reason usually is because that person did it, or this happened. And instead, no, it's I wanted that. Oh, I see. I had some responsibility in this emotional reaction, that I had an expectation, and to be honest about it, not saying I shouldn't have expectations because it's not spiritual. Not if that's how we feel. As Swamiji said once to somebody, why pretend you don't have these desires when you do? It's much more effective to be honest about where we are and to be truthful. That gets us moving forward. So, these first 2 together, you could just take them and be set for a long time, a lifetime of spiritual growth, looking out for desires, especially as they relate to anger, and then diffusing anger by looking at what desires that caused the anger. And it's a very cyclical process. When it's difficult, when you have great suffering at the hands of another person, and it's very hard to see how I had a desire that makes me angry, when if you asked 100 people, all of them would agree that I have every right to be angry, then don't. Don't apply it in a situation where it's too difficult. Work in smaller, it's easier to handle situations. When we find ourselves going, yeah, I'm not completely okay with what that person just said, but I can fake it, and then afterwards, brooding over it, then that might be an easier one to tackle. Okay, so let us carry on with the video. This is about 10 minutes of Swamiji reading the next one and commenting on it. Okay, well, it's interesting how Swamiji speaking then and on this topic could also touch on things that are, part of which, some of which are going on for us now, not at this level, but still, Master spoke a lot about coming difficulties, and we grew up at Ananda hearing Swamiji tell Master telling of these difficulties, and I don't know if this is that difficulty or not, but certainly for those of us who are older, this may be one of the biggest sort of world changes that we witness in our lives. And I was speaking to somebody who was talking about, I remember the war of 1973 and blacking out the windows so that no light would show, and so you may not remember those times. I didn't live through times like that, but many of you did. And even if you were young or younger, certainly younger, but even young. And so now it's interesting that we are having a time in our lives that none of us will forget. And so Dr. Peter said the world will not be the same after this. Not that it will be devastated or something like that, but we will be forced to look at life differently once this whole thing, goes away, or once we've learned the lessons from it. But I don't want to dwell on that right now, except to say that these attitudes that we're going through can be very helpful for giving us strength. And you could say that's the other purpose of the spiritual path on a very fundamental level, is to make you strong in yourself. Someone asked Swamiji, what is the best yoga posture? And he said, that one which helps you to stand squarely on your own 2 feet. And so similarly, all of what we do spiritually should only be to make us stronger in ourselves. Of course, that strength in ourselves comes from God. We only have any strength if we align ourselves to God. But still, it's something that we feel that with Him I am protected. Like the wonderful affirmation of Swamiji's, I live in the fortress of God's inner presence. Nothing and no one can break through these walls and harm me. I think that one's for courage, I'm not sure. But again, I live in the fortress of God's inner presence. Nothing and no one can break through these walls and harm me. And another, I live protected by God's infinite light. So long as I remain in the heart of it, nothing and no one can harm me. And there's a few others like that. They can be very helpful to say, especially as you have felt that in meditation or beyond, and also as you have seen it in your life through different coincidences, different so-called, different miracles, different times that you've had God's protection revealed to you very clearly. So remember that, though, that we have to become strong. So when you feel uncomfortable or nervous or any of these things, make it a point to see how you can get yourself together first, rather than trying to solve the outward causes. As so many of you have said to me, and so many students have said also in the meditation classes, that I have so many problems, and now I meditate, and I feel much more calm. I have the same problems, but I am calmer. And because we've all addressed ourselves to the main problem, which was our reaction to these things. Remember, letting something go, as Swamiji said, just take it calmly. Let what comes of itself, let it come. It doesn't mean that we don't care. It doesn't mean that we don't act to address and even remedy the situation. But it means we do so with a much clearer mind, a much more open and freer heart. Having this attitude of, on one level, detachment, and on another level, seeing everything coming from God and in God, then it makes us much more practical, much more effective in what we do. So it isn't at all just stepping away and copping out. I wanted to take a moment now for questions, and I think what we'll do is, if you have a question, if you want to just type it in, since there are so many of us, and you can do that. Meanwhile, if I wanted to read a little bit about what Swamiji writes about overcoming the ego. So you can take a moment to, if you do have a question about anything further, please write it and we'll address it in a moment. So Swamiji is talking about overcoming delusion, and we may talk about the specific delusions Master mentioned as the big three delusions to overcome. But Swamiji continues in this line: in all delusions, finally, the feelings that accompany them revolve around the ego. When you want something, even as insignificant as an ice cream cone, the thought in your mind is, I want it. It's for me. I will get to enjoy it myself. This is what I mean by revolving one's feelings around the ego. They verily churn the ether. Our first need, then, is to neutralize those feelings, our emotional reactions, our likes and dislikes, our attractions and aversions, our attachments and repulsions. Hence Patanjali's definition of yoga as chitta vritti nirodha, the neutralization of the vortices of feeling. Our subtlest and most intimate feelings, however, so in other words, what he's just said is a way of addressing to things we already know, having come to the spiritual path and what we've talked about in this class. And now he takes it to a deeper level. Our subtlest and most intimate feelings, however, pertain directly to the ego itself and act as constant ego reminders, ego boosters or ego deflators. You see? To think, I'm pretty good, is an ego booster. And why do we have to take special notice of that? But then to conclude, no, I'm not very good, I'm terrible, is an ego deflator, and just as bad in terms of us drawing our attention back to ourselves. You see? So whether it's positive or negative, it amounts to the same energy. And so we don't want to think excessively about ourselves. That's one of the tricks, is so many people in the name of spirituality just criticize themselves. But again, let's talk about God. As Swamiji said, I think in this video but elsewhere, on the spiritual path we want to be samadhi affirming, not ego denying. You see? Of course, we seek to transcend the ego, to overcome the ego. It's not that we're not ego denying, we're ego affirming. No, we're not ego affirming. We're samadhi affirming. But in other words, look to where you're going, not to where you've come from, not even to where you are, except if you are going to define yourself where you are. Include in your definition your aspiration, your heading, your direction. You could say that often the way you define ships, a position of a ship or an airplane, is not just their absolute position in space, but their heading. Which direction are they moving in? Because by the time you tell where an airplane is, yes, it's directly at this whatever, well, it's moved in the time it's taken you to say that. So you have to include also which way it's moving, north or whatever, or up in altitude. So define yourself in the same way. Define yourself according to, well, wherever I am, this is where I'm wanting to go. This is how I'm wanting to be. And as many times as I make mistakes or whatever it is, I know I'm going in the right direction. Speaking of planes anyway, as we were talking about once before, this is actually what attitude means in a plane, is which way the nose is pointed. Is the nose of the plane pointing up or down? And this is part of where this is related to our attitude. I don't mean that we should point our noses up in the air. That's no good. But are we heading up? Are we wanting to head up? It's a wonderful line of Swamiji's song in Come Gather Round. He says, come gather round, let joy sing out today. Dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, its only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. And every time I hear that song, I often think of Swamiji saying, lift up your head, because sometimes, I'm sorry to say, that the head is down for any reason, just even being tired. And just lift up your head. It's an invitation. It's again a kind thing. Not, hey, Mela! It's not like that. It's not an order. It's not saying measure up. It's saying lift up your head. Greet the rising sun. And so in the same way, let us feel that way, even to ourselves. Talk ourselves into lifting that head, the nose of the plane, back up. So, ego boosters, ego deflators. These tendencies must be completely eliminated before we can achieve liberation. Each vortex of feeling draws energy inward to its center in egoic awareness. The ego itself forms the supreme vortex. In the simple thought, I want an ice cream cone, two concepts exist, I and ice cream cone. The concept, I, ties the ice cream cone to oneself, as opposed to saying, an ice cream cone is desired, sort of abstractly. But if I emphasize that thought further and think, how clever of me to have had this idea, and then, how much more clever than my friends who thought only of drinking a glass of water, and then maybe even, it's people like me who boost the national economy, and finally, they ought to make me the next president. In all this we see that the ice cream cone itself has come to play a minor role compared to the more central thought, I. When the thought of self becomes paramount, the ego takes to spinning about itself, becoming ever larger as it does so. It is good to work on eliminating all desires, but it is even more important to do one's best to diminish the magnetic power of the ego itself. For the greater that magnetism, the greater also will be the number of outer fulfillments it will attract to itself. It is necessary above all, therefore, to attack ego consciousness directly, and not only to work indirectly at removing one by one every outward attachment and desire. If I want fame, for instance, it is more important to convince myself of my own unimportance than to become merely convinced of the shallowness of public recognition. You see, instead of saying, I want fame, and I know I'm not supposed to want to, so fame isn't all that important, it's better to say, you know what, I am not all that important. If I want money, it is important to persuade myself that self-glorification induced by wealth is worse than attachment to a swollen bank account. You see, in other words, wealth in itself isn't bad. It's not only, well, what do we do with that wealth? Yeah, maybe. But what does that wealth do to us? You see? So often, and it's funny to me, I've seen very wealthy people have great pride because for them, as well, Swamiji put it this way, that he knew someone who said, I don't see why people struggle so much around making money. I've never had any problem. And he said it was entirely karmic. She was not particularly ingenious or whatever in her way. She just had good money karma. And so, fine, good for her. But the problem was it induced this pride that because it was easy for her and it wasn't easy for so many others, she thought herself better than they. And so, anyway, this is one of the challenges that happens, and it's not just with wealth. We can see it with, for example, intelligence. Suppose you're highly intelligent. You may sometimes wonder, well, gosh, what's their problem? I've never had any challenges in that particular way. Or why can't they just get it together? If you have a technical skill, you know, with computers, you may sometimes smile at someone. Oh, look, they don't even know how to do that. I don't see why. It's so obvious. Yeah, to us. But then let's turn the tables and suppose they're better at cooking or they're better artists. I know that, if we had I found myself at the bottom of any drawing contest. It was very humbling for me. As a first grade teacher, I was standing in for somebody who was away, traveling, and so I was not the first standard teacher of these children, but I had to stand in for their teacher. And I was very competently instructing them on plus and minus, and let me let you in on a little secret even about times and division or into multiplication. And, I wasn't feeling proud about, my position over these 6-year-olds. It was rather ridiculous. But I am sharing with you what I have already learned, and I think it'll help you. And they were learning. And then on the schedule, it came time for art. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, good, because then you give them paper, pens, pencils, colors, everything, and they just, amuse themselves. And we had a theme, but anyway, then I had nothing to do. And so I started drawing something too. And I don't know if I was worst in the class, but I was definitely in the running. Or these class of 6-year-olds in terms of, I don't know what it was, but I just couldn't, express anything of what I was trying to through those pencils and crayons. And some of them had great gift as artists, but you didn't have to have great gifts to beat me. Some of them had just mild competence, and that was enough. So I appreciated that moment, because it's easy, even unconsciously, to sort of elevate ourselves in a particular way according to just one parameter or one dimension. Even the spiritual path. Well, at least I'm spiritual. Oops, even in saying that, we've taken a little hit, you see. We can say, at least I love God. Well, maybe that's more in the right direction, but God loves the other person just as much as He loves us. So maybe let's try to see it from God's point of view and with His attitude. Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, this is getting back to fame and money. Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, money and fame are like prostitutes, loyal to no man. Yet the pride they induce are like a disease which eats directly at one's inner peace and happiness. A person may rightly say that if one takes advantage of others, he will live in constant fear of being taken advantage of in return. In himself, however, the self-affirmation that accompanies such wrong behavior is a ball and chain heavier and more self-impeding than attraction to the desired objects themselves. If I steal, I affirm my own worth as a human being above that of other human beings. If I seek fame for myself rather than for whatever good I may be able to accomplish in the world, I push my ego above all the other waves around me and try, as a result, to distance myself from my own true source in God. Thus, more important than working on specific desires, attachments, and outwardly directed delusions is the work I do to eliminate my sense of separateness from the great ocean of life. So again, first, to accomplish this, meditate. Because every time we meditate, we loosen the hold the ego has on us. Every time we meditate, as we draw closer to God or touch that presence at all, we feel just, I want to be that. I don't want to be this. I want to be in that. I don't want to be away from that. I am the bubble. Make me the sea. I enjoy being in the sea so much. And so that naturally helps us to shy away from the ego, because we feel that it's separating us. Remember, on the ocean of spirit, which all of us are in, the egoic souls, Master, not souls, because the soul isn't egoic, but the egoic consciousness is represented as a large wave trying to pull itself away from the ocean. Whereas Master said the saint, the self-realized soul, is a little wave, just even barely a ripple appearing on the surface because it wants to merge back and be in the ocean completely. In another way, it was sweet when Swamiji was with Master and Master helped him up. Swamiji helped Master to stand up. He grabbed, Master put his hands out and Swamiji grabbed them and helped him to his feet, and they were very close together, as Swamiji said in telling the story, because Swamiji had been thinking before this what a joy it was to be Master's disciple, and then in that moment Master said to him, just a bulge of the ocean. Just wanting to remind Swamiji that it was really God he was loving in Master, and always wanting to direct his attention, his devotion to God. I have to say Swamiji was the same way. He would never let us call him the Guru. He would always say, Master is the Guru. And of course Master was the Guru, but we couldn't avoid acknowledging that it was through Swamiji that Master came to us. That it was through Swamiji that Master lived in a way that we could feel that we were living with Master because of how much we felt of God's presence in Swamiji. Again, Master's presence in Swamiji. And so, but he said Master is the Guru. Master said God is the Guru. He wouldn't claim to be the Guru either. He never wanted people to just fix their devotion on him, but to go perhaps through him to God. You could look at it that way. So secretly then we said, okay, Swamiji, we wouldn't argue with him, but we still secretly thought our own thoughts. We couldn't help it. And this was even affirmed by Anandamoyi Ma when Jyotishji went to Anandamoyi Ma, and Swamiji was there too, and Jyotishji was asking along with others questions of Anandamoyi Ma, and many of her answers were just, ask your Guru. And Jyotishji says that at first he thought, well, how can I ask Master? He's not in the body, and here you are, and you're saying ask him. And then he realized when she was saying ask your Guru, she was saying ask your Guru. He's sitting right there, why don't you ask him? You see, as always, as Master writes in the autobiography of a yogi, the saint, ignoring my question, answered my thought. And so in this case, Anandamoyi Ma was perhaps addressing that to the devotees that, why are you bothering to ask me when you have your Guru right here? Because that's what you may not realize. And understandably, because Swamiji said it was much better for people to think of me as their friend, especially at this time, because there's, for various reasons. In America, there can be a kind of, I don't need a guru, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do, and all of this. In fact, this idea is very common in India too nowadays. And there's a certain merit to it, because you do need to stand strongly on your own feet until you realize that you're not strong at all. The merest crisis can knock everything over. There's a story of Swamiji. He often tells that a man came up to him and said, do you think I need a guru? And Swamiji said, no, of course not. Unless you want to find God, then you need a guru. But until then, why bother with it? Because he could see the man was ready for a fight. And as soon as he said, no, you don't need to, the man, oh. And then I think the man was pleased. What Swamiji doesn't often add is the rest of the story. That man who was so proud of everything in life and taking this on, and I don't need a guru, what happened to him? It's a sad story with a happy ending. His wife got deathly ill. She got very, very sick. And then, unfortunately, due to a medical error in the way, she survived. Happy ending. I've learned from my wife, don't put people through all the suspense. Get to the point first so they don't have to, have their BP rise up while you tell the story. And I don't know if I used to tell horror stories in a past life. I don't even mean to, but often they come out that way. So anyway, his happy ending. But she got very sick, and because of the medication that was wrong, she had terrible complications, which I won't even go into, but they were horrifying. And she survived. But the man, who was a big executive in a huge Indian corporation, with all that power and all that money, he realized he couldn't do anything to save her. And so he was helpless, and he turned to his daughter, who was on this path in a Kriya bond, and in fact the means through which he met Swami Kriyananda in the first place. And she said, we'll pray, we'll ask everyone at Ananda to pray. Swamiji was praying, and luckily his wife came through it all. The doctors had said there's no hope for her, and I mean, none at all. And it was amazing that she recovered. And in fact, not only did she live, but the terrible condition which would have disfigured her permanently left her with almost no scarring at all. And the doctor said it's just simply a miracle. We've never seen anyone recover from something like this. And so the man then acknowledged that there must be a power in this universe greater even than mine. And he became much more humble. I have to, unfortunately, I should probably stop the story there. The epilogue is he became humble for a time. Because like all of us, we go in and out of these things. We pray on God in times of desperation, and then when we get bailed out, we can sometimes forget who it was who bailed us out. God is patient. God understands. But as I've been saying to so many of you on the phone and also in these other sessions that we've had in the day, the morning meditations and so on, just having spent so much time already in God was really like prepping for the exam. This is the exam we're in now. And so we know that the poor 12th standard students and 10th standard students were having their board exams. All of us are having our board exams now. And for those of us, which is all of you, and those of you, I'm sure, listening to the recording and beyond, those of us consciously trying to direct our thoughts toward God, to live, to at least include Him in our lives at all, we'll find then this time much easier to pass through. What comes of itself, let it come. And it's important to understand that, because that was the statement Swamiji made at the beginning of the video, and he referred to in another situation how he was with a fellow disciple of Master, direct disciple, and the person, they were in a restaurant and some food came that they hadn't ordered, but it was good food and they had no objection to it, so they received it. And the person said to him, what comes of itself, let it come. And then the person added, the good things anyway. And Swamiji said, that was not what Master said. He said to us. He didn't obviously correct the person in the moment. He brought it up not to say, see, that was wrong, but because in fact it did evidence a lack of understanding in other areas as well on that person's part, which wouldn't be worth mentioning except that they made such a point of saying that they were always right. And so, remember, it's not just the good things anyway, if you look at it from one point of view. From another point of view, everything that comes to us ultimately is a good thing anyway. I mean, look at what we're going through right now. The fact that we can have this, we're all sort of quarantined, but the fact that we can connect on the internet means that we can, so many more of you are attending the sadhanas, we're reaching so many more of you. I don't care about, so we're reaching so many more people outside the community, that's fine. But right now we want to make sure the community is strengthened itself. As I was saying in the morning, one reason why we are affirming our identity as Ananda Chennai, Kriya Bonds and Disciples in Ananda Chennai, is not to exclude others. In fact, we usually do just the opposite when we're doing prayers in person in the temple. We include all of our centers in India, our Ananda centers worldwide, and everybody else outside of Ananda, so that we consciously avoid the temptation to become just a small little family, those of us here, and our Guru Bhais nearby, and tend to think that this is our whole universe. It's just an easy thing that can come into the mind. And on the one hand, it's good to have a strong family to support us and to identify and with that family and to feel that support. But on the other hand, we don't want to limit ourselves, and that happens so often, even unconsciously. And so this is mine. These are my people. This is my place. And those other places, they're fine, but this is mine. So when we're together, we often will make a point of expanding our identity. But right now, we're not together. You see? And so we are, but not physically. And so it's important then when suddenly that automatic kind of merging. Sometimes on pilgrimage, people at Ananda would joke about being part of an amoeba, that collectively, each one, the whole group was an amoeba together, and that they started to feel strange if, like a few went off somewhere or were sick and weren't able to go out that day, that part of the amoeba was missing, and that when they came home, they were suddenly all back in their own apartments or living in their own ways and not in that sense of togetherness that pilgrimage brings, and kind of feeling a little bit cut off from the rest of the amoeba that way. And so, again, because we're separate, it's important to affirm and to remind ourselves of our spiritual family deliberately, because the temptation is to feel isolated or to feel a loss of that identity with whatever identity is around us. Sri Yukteswar said that we are hypnotized by our own experiences, and we can't see. So we're hypnotized by our daily environment, and we can't see beyond our own experiences, just our superficial experiences. And so we want to constantly break that hypnosis. So whatever we're in can start to seem like this is all there is. And so that's why it's nice to remember, no, I have many families that I'm a part of, that I take care of and that take care of me. In this case, of course, as all common children of Master. Okay, so I think before I go on, I want to take a moment for any questions that have come in, or comments.
Anyone was just asking, what was the book that Swamiji mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. Prem was asking, what is that group that was in Hiroshima that...
Not group. What is the book?
Oh, the book. I'm sorry. Well, let me answer my own question then, just for the sake of the record. What was the group in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? There were two that were untouched by these bombs. I don't know. You can probably Google it. But he said that the they were both Christian groups. One was a group of Jesuits, which Loyola is the other word for them, interestingly, because we know Loyola College. And then the other is they were, Jesuits, and I can't remember the other. But anyway, you can look that up and see. What was the book? He said James von Prague, Ghosts Among Us. I could only say because I remember him saying it. I haven't read the book myself. He also mentioned another woman who saw people, whether they were alive or dead. In fact, that was her question. When someone came to her door, she would open the door and say, "Are you alive or dead?" Because she had to get that first topic clarified before she could proceed further. So interesting things that people have had. There's a lot of things like this, not just that, but weird stories. When I was a science teacher, there were all these interviews done by National Geographic, not Psychic Today, but National Geographic, of people who had lived after being struck by lightning, and the strange experiences that they had. One person was unable to feel any pain anymore, any discomfort, any physical discomfort anymore. He wasn't numb, he wasn't paralyzed, he just didn't feel any more pain. And he even said, I went out in extremely cold weather, whatever it was, like minus 10 C, in shorts and a t-shirt. I've got pictures. It's really sweet to see. I can prove it. Another man who had been blinded by an accident, got struck by lightning, could see again. Fascinating, the things. So I'm not recommending this as a particular therapy. I'm just saying that there's a lot of weird things that can happen to us that we don't know. We don't have all the answers for. Okay, James von Prague, Ghosts Among Us. Aprama, Henora Kelvia?
That just wrote and said, I was hearing Swamiji as I was getting shouted at my home. Just when Swamiji said how to handle people who are angry, there are also people that need something just like all, to not think why this is happening to me. He found it very active.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Praveen. I appreciate you sharing that. It's very helpful when these things come up exactly when we need them. I'm assuming you all read it, but it's amazing not just what Swamiji said, but the fact that he said it right when you needed to hear it, and we find that it happens all the time. That especially if you're listening to recordings of Swamiji, if you're reading autobiography of a yogi, that something will come in just in that moment that you need to hear for this moment. I gave an example of that today when I shared with you. I just was listening to a talk of Swamiji's, and the first thing practically that he said was quoting from this poem: "Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Minds innocent and quiet take, that for a hermitage." And just, it's not good to explain poetry too much, but just to be clear, even if you're stuck in stone walls or in iron bars, you don't have to define it as a prison or a cage. In fact, if your mind is innocent and quiet, you can instead define it as a hermitage. You can, and many of you are saying that, were telling me on the phone that I'm at home, and so first thing I can do more sadhana. And I'm having a much more peaceful life. And of course there are concerns and all these things, and now we are not indoors only by our own wish, but even by the law now. And yet we can take it in a good way. Why? Because what comes of itself, let it come. You can turn it to good advantage. And as I started to say, everything, I said, let what comes of itself, let it come. The good things anyway. Well, in a sense, everything ends up being good because we see what good comes of it. I guess I did say that. I got onto this whole track of at least we're together online. So that's a nice benefit here. But I do have to say that we miss you, and we miss being together with you. There's no substitute for that. Okay?
We are doing Kriya 2 times.
We are doing Kriya 2 times. What to do?
For divine bliss in tips for the next 21 days.
What to do for divine bliss in the next 21 days?
No, any tips for the next...
Oh, any tips? Did you say divine bliss?
Yes, what to do for divine bliss.
And what to do for divine bliss in the next 21 days? That's a very good question, and I think that's one that we probably should be on all of our minds. Because on the one hand, we have our default reaction as people emotionally to this situation, and of course our concerns for other people or how will we make it through, it's all unknown. We may have another reaction as devotees saying, okay, fine. I can now meditate, I don't have to worry so much about outward things. I have a peace. I have an opportunity that I don't normally have. Let me make the most of it. I'll do my sadhana. I'll devote more time to spiritual things and so on. I have a relatively simple life. If it's just about making sure there's food and everybody's cared for and all that, true, fine. But then we have to say, how can I take that deeper? How can I take even greater advantage? Or how can I bring God closer? How can I share that peace with others? How can I be patient with them if they are not feeling peaceful? Because sometimes we don't like it when we're working to feel peace and somebody comes in and disturbs our peace. And it even can make us angrier than we would have been. And so, because we'd lost that peace and I had it, and now it's gone. So instead, to just say, well, as Praveen was just saying, everybody wants something. And if they're angry, it may just be because they're afraid. In this situation, it may be because they want control. And they know they don't have control right now in this situation. And that can be disturbing. Why do we want control? Because we want to feel safe. If I can control it, then I can be safe. Really, all the control we have is an illusion. So much of things that come to us are conditioned by our karma. If we're meaning they're going to happen anyway, but if we're linked to God, we have much more protection. Remember, it's not that God favors you because you love Him. And He says, well, because you have given me so much devotion, I will protect you in this case. But He won't protect someone else? No. Who doesn't love Him? It's that in loving Him, we open ourselves to His protection. That's the thing. God is constantly trying to protect us. And so, to protect everyone, and those who receive His help, who accept His help, because they love Him, because they stop and they listen to His whispers, because they pause a moment before leaping into the next thing and then find, oh, thank God I did. God was asking me to pause and to reconsider. Then they find that protection. And sometimes we have to be careful because God may be directing us right at the time when we are bent on doing the opposite. I remember once, I won't go into the whole bloody details of the story, but somebody had upset me. And I felt that I was justified in calling this friend and expressing a wee bit of displeasure in the way they had handled that situation, especially as the way they had handled it had been, as I perceived, against me, and especially after all that I had just done for them, again, in my perception of the story, according to my version of events, which may or may not have been accurate. And so I felt justified, and so I thought, you know what? People will just speak frankly, speak openly. I'm not going to shout or be mad. I'm just going to, maybe they aren't aware, and so I'm just going to bring it to their notice. And so I had this ball of tension inside myself. I called it justification. But secretly, there was a part of me that was going, this doesn't feel that this is the right thing to do. You know what test I had to know it, that I wasn't doing the right thing? Even though I was perfectly justified and there was nothing wrong with it. And after all, people say much worse things than this. I'm only going to say a little bit. I'm going to give them a chance to say their piece after I say my piece. And so, what was my test? That I asked myself, well, if it doesn't matter, if it's not wrong, maybe what if you don't call? No, I have to call. You see? I couldn't put it down. That proved I was attached. It proved whatever I said, even if it was right, was going to be said in the wrong way or with the wrong motivation, which makes it wrong. So even then I didn't stop. And then I called the person, and then it took a while to answer. And as the phone was ringing, I practically heard in my other ear this voice saying, "Don't!" And so I thought, right as the person answered, this voice repeated, "Don't!" And so I said, and it wasn't saying don't, it wasn't pleading, it was saying don't. And so I said, Hi, yes, I just wanted to make sure you got there okay. Yes, okay, good, all right. Thank you so much for calling. You're welcome. And that was it. So I was spared, saved from myself by this adamantine voice ordering me to cease and desist. And of course, afterwards I saw that look. I also had felt justified. That person who I was calling had shouted at me plenty. And so if I just said one little thing, it could hardly count in the overall balance. But that was not the inner guidance I got. And thank God, that with God's infinite power or master or whoever, the voice could be loud enough to get through my thick skull and stop me in the course and redirect me in what I was doing. So again, we have to make a point of listening to these things when they come, especially when we are fired up. So, to close now with these suggestions that Swamiji makes. Thus, more important than working on specific desires, attachments, and outwardly directed delusions is I read that already. What can I do then to minimize the supreme self-definition, this unceasing awareness that I am in some way separate and different from everything and everyone else? Here are a few suggestions. And so he begins with the first 7 that we did last week. And these are now for this week. I would encourage us to try to practice one or more of these. This is number 8. Be sincere. Don't back bashfully into the limelight, as someone once described Albert Einstein doing. In other words, he was pretending to be modest. Let your modesty express your true feeling, and not be a show you put on to impress others. Persuade yourself by countless and constant little affirmations that you are only a ripple on the great ocean of consciousness. And in this case, the emphasis is not, tell yourself you are only a ripple. No, that you are a part of the great ocean of consciousness. In other words, expand your identity beyond this little ripple. Only the divine ocean itself is of any true consequence. Number 9, the next one. In group conversations, be neither a groundhog diving into your hole in fear of your own shadow, nor a lion beating everyone into submission with the loudness of your roar. But think rather in terms of simply sharing with others. Think rather in terms simply of sharing with others. You see, it's funny how sometimes we know how people will draw attention to themselves in a group by constantly talking or interrupting or shouting. But people do the same thing when they're asked a question. They go, I just couldn't possibly answer. What could I say? And it draws just as much attention. And so it's better to just be in the conversation if you can. 10. When speaking in public, think more in terms of what you share with others than of their impression of you. A wonderful piece of advice. 11. Show respect for all, but don't insist that they respect you properly. You see, it's one of the tricks the devotee falls into. I show respect for all. And I think you should subscribe to that same philosophy, to show respect to all, including me. And if they do scorn or insult you, remind yourself, this is their problem, not mine. How many times have I found that helpful advice of Swamiji's for myself and for others? If somebody is speaking against you, speaking badly about you to others, if they are criticizing you, even silently, if they are to your face putting you down, remember, it shows their smallness of mind. You see, it's subtle. It's not that you want to tell them that, because then it starts to become an aggressive move. But they are demeaning themselves, or showing themselves to be uncharitable when they criticize you, especially to others. So don't worry, because so many people worry. What if they say something about me to someone else? Especially, there is that phrase, very common in India. What will people say? It's really quite something. It's common in other countries too. But just to say, I've heard it so much here that I've heard it even as a phrase. What will people say in different languages? What you log kya keh rahe hai, or whatever, whatever. I can't even speak. The reason I can't speak the Hindi well is because I'm trying to think of what it would be in Tamil, and so I'm getting caught in that too, and then botching the whole thing, even the English. So don't worry about what people will say or what they're, again, it just looks badly for them if they do. And if people are inclined to believe them, if somebody speaks against you to your friends and turns your friends against you, they weren't your friends in the first place. If somebody is your friend and hears some terrible thing about you, maybe they would have the decency to come to you and say, I heard this strange thing. I just wonder, why would that person think that way? What's going on? And at least give you a chance to say something, or they might even dismiss it, that this in so many ways disagrees with you as I know you from my own experience, that I knew it couldn't be true. So again, it's their problem, not mine, not yours. The next one. Show others appreciation, not only because they will then be more likely to appreciate you, but also, and more importantly, because thereby you will expand your own sense of identity. You see, when we appreciate things in others, we, in a certain way, include that in our own awareness, our own sense of, look at this wonderful thing that this person is also doing. Another one, laugh with others, never at them. It's very helpful to do this. This is something Swamiji did all the time, and he commented about P.G. Woodhouse, for example, as an author, that his humor was always kindly. He wasn't demeaning, even if people were acting ridiculous in his stories as he wrote them. The laughter was never at this person being a fool or with criticism. It was always, in a certain way, appreciative, as if, even I myself could have done that same thing. But also, it's just so funny. the life itself. And lastly, when someone criticizes you, analyze yourself to see whether there may not be something in you that needs correction. Don't answer hotly or challengingly, "Oh, and what about you?" It's funny how often I have to confess even that temptation has come to me and I have acted on it. That somebody says, "You have this problem." "Yeah, okay, well, I notice you have that problem." What does that have to do with anything? You know, that person is not the one under discussion right now. And we don't benefit if we do that. And so let it be said on the record that Swamiji has advised, don't answer hotly or challengingly, "Oh, and what about you?" Proceeding then to list his shortcomings, which balance your own. Don't be defensive and never try to justify yourself. Often, however, it is a mistake to admit a fault, meaning on the other hand, it is a mistake to admit to a fault, for unless the person is a true friend, he may someday hold that admission over your head. Master said this, don't tell your faults to other people, lest they turn them against you in a moment of anger later on. You remember you said you have this problem, and you're doing it right now. You see, it's really nobody's business. Simply say, if somebody criticizes you, "Thank you. Maybe you are right." This is what Sri Yukteswar advised Master to say. Maybe you are right. Maybe you are right to get out of the fight. "I will give the matter my careful consideration. In this way you will not involve yourself in any personal or emotional complications." And if you have one definition of what is living on the spiritual path, renunciation to simplify your life, tapasya to live an uncluttered life, the entire purpose is this: to not involve yourself in any personal or emotional complications. Meaning, to not involve yourself in any further personal and emotional complications. We already have plenty just on our own. And so let us work on clearing those out without generating any more. Okay? So it's been very nice to be with you all. I would appreciate it if you would like. One thing, even with the Zoom, even though we can interact nicely, it's still, all of us together. And sometimes you might have something you want to mention privately, or if nothing else, as I said, I'd be happy to hear from you. Just I keep hearing in my mind Master's from the recording. He says, "Write to me, dear ones," in that one recording that we listened to at Christmas, because he was in seclusion, and so he was telling all the disciples from his room through a loudspeaker. But then he was saying, "Write to me," because he wanted to hear from them too. In this case, about their experiences during the meditation. But in this case, not on such an exalted level, I'm afraid I can come from. But I'd be happy to hear from you anything you appreciated about this class, or if you have another question unrelated to this or another comment. It keeps our dialogue and our exchange going. Okay? So coming up next on Ananda Chennai TV, we have at 12 p.m. the noon meditation, which you can watch on Facebook, but better to watch on Zoom so that we know you're watching. You have the secret private Zoom entrance, whereas the public door is Facebook. And as we did today, we'll probably do tomorrow, that we keep the meditation going, the broadcast going, even when we turn off the public part of it. Then we can speak more freely to those of you who are meditating, from Ananda Chennai. And then in the evening, we have the sadhana from 6 to 9 p.m., but really the broadcast will be 6 to 8:30, and then at 8:30 we'll switch over to, in other words, we'll end this broadcast, and you'll need to click on the link to watch Jyotishji and Deviji's broadcast for our first Thursday prayer session, which will from now on be happening each Thursday as a way of sending light to the world. Okay, and then just a reminder that on Friday we have our public program, which you can invite people to, Tools for Tough Times, from 7 to 8 p.m. on Friday. That'll be on Facebook. Okay, I can't reiterate enough how lovely it is to connect with you in this way, and at the same time how we do miss being together. And so, as Arul Saravanan was saying, what do we do to be in bliss? What do we do in the next 21 days? I think we want to all discover that together. And as someone else was saying, we need to find creative ways to connect on deeper levels. I hope you got to see that thing that Dharmini sent out about 10 things you can do right now in this situation. She posted it in the community group. That can be a very helpful thing to practice. A few of you were telling me how some of those suggestions you immediately implemented in your life. We're very glad to hear that. In these kinds of things we need to share with one another. Even just saying hello is a way of connecting. Of course, to me, I'm happy, but also to others. And someone was telling me that too, that after the sadhana they were connecting with others who had been at the morning meditation, and oh, nice to know you were there, and so on. So, thank you again, and good night. And oh, did I say my other part? That, yeah, I think my mind is not fully clear right now, forgive me. I wanted to say that I can't emphasize enough how wonderful it is to be together, and also that still we do miss you. So, thank you. Good night.